Every bad person I've ever met in a lifetime in Washington was aligned against J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance, I think, widely considered to be the most radical choice.
The only person who was more excited than J.D. Vance this afternoon was Vladimir Putin.
J.D. Vance is an ideological nationalist. That's a much more dangerous virus.
So J.D. Vance, the junior senator from Ohio, is the running bait. He got the nod from Donald Trump yesterday. He is 39 years old. He's the first millennial candidate for national office. He was the author of Hillbilly Elegy, which ended up being sort of a Rosetta Stone for the elite liberals in the media and in Manhattan who just don't understand American voters, certainly those voters in the Rust Belt that were so desperate, so put upon, so abused by the federal government and by corporations that they ran to Obama in 2008 because Obama promised hope and change, and he brought none of it. In fact, he made it worse for them. And then they ran to Trump. And you'll remember these voters are the ones that confused the elites in our media, in our political world so much. And Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance ended up being this sort of explainer for them so they could understand exactly what these voters were thinking and feeling and what they had been through for the last several decades. Hillbilly Elegy then converted into a adaptation for Netflix starring Glenn Close. It won awards. And he was the darling of the left, J.D. Vance was, until something critical happened, until J.D. Vance started going on Tucker Carlson, until he started appearing on Fox News, specifically Tucker Carlson, saying, yeah, Trump's the answer here. Trump is the answer. And Trump represents the America First policy that these people need to turn this country around. At that point, everybody in Washington and in the elite media decided to hate J.D. Vance. Here's Tucker Carlson last night at an event in Milwaukee for Heritage Foundation explaining this phenomenon.
Now, J.D. Vance is the VP pick, and I think every person who pays close attention has got to be thrilled by that. And if you don't know much about J.D. Vance, I'm not even going to make a case for J.D. Vance. I'm going to tell you what I just saw, which is that every bad person I've ever met in a lifetime in Washington was aligned against J.D. Vance. And I do think the negative case is often more powerful because I know of myself, I do not think I'm a particularly good person. I have strong reasons for feeling that way. I don't always think that my side is right. I know for a fact I have been wrong many, many times. And I hope to correct and be honest about my error. So it's not like I think that, I'm always, God's always on my side. Sometimes I'm not on God's side. But I definitely know who's representing the other side. It's a lot easier to tell who the people who are only in it because they like, killing other people in pointless wars. Like, I know who those people are. And their odor is so powerful that I can smell one when he walks in the room. And every single one of those people in a line that would extend from Milwaukee to Chicago was lined up over the last week to knife J.D. Vance. Not on personal grounds. He's a perfectly nice guy. He's like one of the only members of the Senate with a happy marriage. True. But because they thought he would be harder to manipulate and slightly less enthusiastic about killing people. That's it. That he would be an impediment to their exercising power. And boy, they went after him in a way I've just kind of never seen, which I think happens every day in Washington. I just don't have a vantage on it because I'm far, far away and grateful to be.
All right. So it's funny. Tucker is echoing here something that my old mentor, the person who got me into this business, used to say all the time. My mentor, by the way, if you don't know, he's always over my shoulder every single show. That would be Andrew Breitbart. Andrew Breitbart hired me 15 years ago and changed my life. I threw my old career aside and came into this career. And Andrew Breitbart used to say of some politicians, I don't know much about this person, but she pisses off all the right people. And that's apparently what Tucker is saying about J.D. Vance. Who could Tucker be talking about here? Well, there's a little bit of insight if you want to follow a rabbit trail, little clues about what kind of person Tucker's talking about. Here's a post on X from yesterday from Senator Lindsey Graham. of South Carolina. He said, Senator J.D. Vance has one of the most compelling stories in American politics, overcoming so much adversity in life. He understands the struggles of working Americans as he has walked in their shoes and has become one of their biggest champions. But anyway, there's Lindsey, thumbs up, sitting in the backseat of the car with J.D. saying, I'm so happy for my best friend, J.D. Vance. Tucker reposted that with this comment. Lindsey Graham is a liar. No one lobbied harder against J.D. Vance than he did. And in the sleaziest, most vicious way. He was doing it this morning. This is why everyone hates Washington, because people like Lindsey Graham are happy to lie right to your face, smiling as they plot your destruction. It's disgusting. I think that might be the slightest little clue of the type of person Tucker was referring to in those remarks at Heritage Foundation. You'll also hear a lot of smart political analysts saying, I don't know about this J.D. Vance pick. I mean, when he was elected to the Senate, he actually trailed and won by a smaller margin than Mike DeWine, the Republican governor of Ohio. So, I mean, doesn't that tell you that he's in a year where Republicans did really well in Ohio? J.D. Vance actually tracked behind what most Republicans did, so therefore he must be a weak candidate. Let me and listen, I'm hardly want to measure my credentials up against those really, really smart people in Washington, D.C. who give political analysis like that. You know the people I'm talking about, the ones who said that Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in and Donald Trump didn't have a chance. Yeah, those are the ones. They're the same ones who are now saying that J.D. Vance is a horrible pick because, my gosh, he's such a soft candidate. He ran behind and won by a smaller margin than Mike DeWine did. Let me just clear this up for you. What Tucker just said about how the establishment had their knives out and tried to stop J.D. Vance at all costs, that's why he won with a smaller margin in Ohio than Mike DeWine. Because he was taking friendly fire from establishment Republicans. J.D. Vance has not been picked as Trump's running mate to appease establishment Republicans. He wasn't picked to appease those very people who were wrong about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016, who are now wondering what the heck is going on here. They're still wondering what the heck is going on here. They've never quite figured it out. Now, I'll give you more analysis on J.D. Vance coming up in a bit. But Joe Biden was asked about J.D. Vance, and this is a fascinating exchange.
It's not unusual. He's going to surround himself with people who agree completely with him. Have a voting record. I support him. Even though if you go back and listen to the things J.D. Vance said about Trump.
Well, he said some things about you, yeah.
Well, he said something about me, but see what he said about Trump. What's with you guys? Come on, man.
I'm going to let him finish here because it's quite revealing, but look at the anger in this guy's face. He's such an a-hole. But don't you? Hey, he said things about Trump. What are you doing talking about me, man? You're supposed to be on my side. What's wrong with you people? Don't you know the rules of the game here? You're supposed to spend all your time attacking Trump and you give me a pass. That's what we did in 2020. Why are you changing the rules on me? Look at his face. Anyway, go ahead and finish.
Look, the point I'm making is that J.D. Vance has adopted the same policies, no exceptions on abortion, making sure that he supports the new $5 trillion tax cut that Trump wants to give in the next administration, signing on to the whole notion of whether or not we're going to, he says there's no climate change happening. I mean, he signed on to the Trump agenda, which he should if he's running with Trump.
All right. So a couple of things. First of all, I find it remarkable that a politician would find it, absolutely out of bounds and objectionable that a running mate would actually sign on to the agenda of the top of the ticket. I'm sorry. Did you not demand that of Kamala Harris? You remember her, the one who called you a racist? Yeah. All right. Setting that aside, the lies. I'll get into the lies in a moment. But first, this attack on J.D. Vance, because yes, when he was a political neophyte, before he even started running for office, when he was just a book author who was on to talk about his book, Hillbilly Elegy, and then he was asked about Donald Trump, then at that time he said, yeah, I don't think Donald was really that great. And now he's changed his mind. And people like Joe Biden are so narrow in their vision and so cocooned and so two-dimensional that they don't recognize how powerful that is for Donald Trump. They don't get it, because the irony here, as he complains about Donald Trump only wanting people around him who agree with him, the irony is that that's exactly the bubble Joe Biden has lived in his entire life. He's been a senator. He's never had anyone in the room who says, "Yeah, you're a big blowhard jerk." Senators are surrounded by yes men their entire lives. That's why when he gets a little bit of criticism right now, he acts like his head's going to explode. But the power of Donald Trump going out of his way to choose someone who used to disagree with him and now has decided to agree with him and said, yeah, actually, I was wrong before. Trump was right, and I'm on his team. That is, first of all, a powerful testament to Donald Trump's character, that he is willing to have somebody who has been a critic in the past. You won't see Biden do that. Number two, it sends the message to establishment Republicans. It sends the message to Democrats. It sends the message to independents that you may have heard and thought things about Donald Trump over the last 10 years. So did J.D. Vance. But not only has he come around and changed his mind about America First and Donald Trump's leadership abilities, but Donald Trump has selected him to be his vice president. That's how much he's come around. So maybe you can take a second look too. Criticizing J.D. and there's plenty to criticize J.D. Vance about, but criticizing him because he used to be critical of Donald Trump is a really big trap that Joe Biden just stepped into. But then also he said that J.D. Vance, I want to get to the issue here. Let me go back real fast about abortion specifically.
The point I'm making is that J.D. Vance has adopted the same policies, no exceptions on abortion, making sure that...
That's a lie. It's a lie. And by the way, incredibly revealing and telling that our very devout Catholic president, Joe Biden, when searching for an issue to draw upon that separates him from J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, he immediately goes to killing babies. What a great devout Catholic he is. But it's also a lie. Here is J.D. Vance on Meet the Press just, I believe, 8 weeks ago.
On the question of the abortion pill, what so many of us have said is that, look, we certainly don't, the Supreme Court made a decision saying that the American people should have access to that medication. Donald Trump has supported that opinion. I support that opinion. I think it's important to say that we actually have to have an important conversation in this country about what our abortion policy should be. Donald Trump is the pragmatic leader here. He's saying most abortion policy is going to be decided by the states. We want to make it easier and more affordable for young women and parents to have families to begin with. We want to lower housing costs, eliminate those surprise medical bills that so many families see after they have a baby. So, that's the Trump and Republican approach to this issue. Meanwhile, Joe Biden wants taxpayer-funded abortion up to the moment of birth. It's so crazy to me how the Democrats frame this as Republicans. Just let me finish, Kristen. They frame Democrats as being reasonable and pragmatic when in reality, Senator, Republicans are the one trying to find some common ground here.
As you know, very few abortions take place later in pregnancy, and almost always because there is a medical emergency. I know Trump is trying to distance himself from Project 2025, but we have to point out that a number of people who are involved with it are former Trump officials, Ben Carlson, Peter Navarro, Russ Vought, and others. But just to be clear, you support mifepristone being accessible.
Yes, Kristen, I do. But again, on the Project 2025 issue.
All right. So he goes on to Project 25 because, whatever boogeyman they can throw up there. But there you go. That's J.D. Vance actually saying that he supports the availability of the abortion pill. By the way, pro-lifers like me, not thrilled with that. OK, I'm not here to promote J.D. Vance. I'm here to tell you that what Joe Biden said about him was a lie. Did you also notice that when J.D. Vance or any Republican tries to make their positive case about life on a network television show like Meet the Press by pointing out the Democrats support abortion on demand right up until the moment of birth, which is a fact, and that there are no limitations that they would ever put on this grisly, murderous procedure. And then he made a proactive position on how we have to focus more on housing costs and meal costs. We can't let economic hardship be the reason why a woman in desperate straits would actually want to murder her unborn child. We should actually have economic policies that help people in those conditions, and actually putting forth a positive pro-life message. Did you notice Kristen Welker couldn't let him talk? Had to interrupt, had to get in the way with it. The Meet the Pressed NBC News audience certainly couldn't ever hear something like that. It's incredibly telling. But again, pointing out that Joe Biden is lying about him, about his abortion stance. More on how all the right people are pissed off about J.D. Vance. Here's Rachel Maddow and Claire McCaskill.
J.D. Vance, I think, widely considered to be the most radical choice.
Does not signal that Trump is trying to soften any edges. And the only person who was more excited than J.D. Vance this afternoon was Vladimir Putin. They dropped balloons from the sky where Putin was hanging out this afternoon, because J.D. Vance has even said he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine.
It's all about Russia, people. This was a gift to Putin. See, he's really running things again. That's journalism for you. More on MSNBC. Again, all the right people absolutely losing it over J.D. Vance.
I mean, Donald Trump just selected somebody for his vice presidential running mate who tweeted this. Today is not just some isolated incident, and this is after, of course, the tragedy that happened on Saturday. The central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs. The rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. So, yes, I think we do always need to give people a bridge to do the right thing, and maybe this is a moment for that. But that is the person who has just joined the ticket with Donald Trump. And I think it's important not to forget that either.
And I think, the choice of J.D. Vance had not been announced when J.D. Vance tweeted that out. And so there was still a possibility, if we were going to have like a change of course here as a country, once he said Democrats did this, Democrats, the word there,
Joe Biden did this.
Led directly to is the phrase that he used there, right? Once he said that and blamed it in a partisan way like that, there was an option in the Republican Party and in the Trump campaign to then not pick J.D. Vance.
But let's heed Joy's warning. Let's not memory hole who Trump is. It's probably why he picked him.
Yeah. It probably helped him.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Ari?
I would just add that why did this happen is a question that could be answered slowly through an investigation, or for a lot of people, it doesn't matter. And we've referred to people who had it taken an hour or two that was political, which means they're actually outing themselves. We don't have motive yet. Law enforcement's been on it for several days. We know they got the phone and they don't feel in a position to tell us publicly that the phone has revealed motive. We have clues that are isolated. So he's a registered Republican, but he's made other types of political donations, and we don't have the full context on that. So I do think it's important to remember that what you said is true. Historically, most lone wolf assassinations do not matter that much as to motive over time.
Yeah.
It would matter if hypothetically someone was working in concert with a larger organization.
All right. I thought there was more here about J.D. Vance. Actually, I saw the first part of this clip. But they were saying J.D. Vance is just way too partisan and too pro-Republican and anti-that. He has really mean things to say about Democrats. And because of that, he shouldn't have been the vice presidential pick. These guys on this network talking about how J.D. Vance is too partisan. There's absolutely zero sense of irony or self-awareness over there on that panel. Meanwhile, over on CNN, Van Jones may have taken the cake on the blow your head up kind of reaction to J.D. Vance being the pick.
Part of the reason that J.D. Vance matters isn't for these kind of short-term electoral calculations. He matters because of what he means to the Republican Party long-term. This is cementing a kind of nationalism. Yeah. Now, Trump, to your point, I agree with you. He's an instinctive, impulsive, intuitive nationalist. J.D. Vance is an ideological nationalist. That's a much more dangerous virus because he can polish this stuff and make it seem palatable to people. He can sell this stuff to Silicon Valley. He can sell this stuff other places. And what it does is it locks the Republican Party on a pathway that I think is dangerous for the world. Again, the Ukrainians are now in deep trouble. NATO is now in deep trouble. Trump he could have gone with a Nikki Haley and signaled to the world, hey, listen, I got to give stuff to my base, but I'm not going to abandon the world. This pick is a horror on the world stage. So J.D. Vance matters because Donald Trump is pointing the Republican Party in a very scary direction for the long term.
Well, we've done it, everybody. We've actually found somebody on the national political scene that the left hates more than Donald Trump, apparently. That you just heard it from Van Jones. J.D. Vance is worse than Trump because he's smoother and more polished and an intellectual. He actually believes this stuff, and he can make the case for it. We can't have that. You'll be surprised to know that most Republicans are pleased that Donald Trump did not pick a running mate that Dan Jones, Rachel Maddow, Joe Biden, and Nicole Wallace would approve of. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. I think that's a good thing. This may be my favorite take of all, though. Marianne Williamson, you'll remember her. She's sort of the crystal yoga guru who ran for the Democrat nomination this year and 4 years ago. She put out this quote on X, which is worth noting. J.D. Vance is Trump's choice for VP. His views on women are particularly interesting. Quote, we are effectively run in this country by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. That's awesome. I mean, I'll be honest with you. J.D. Vance was not my first choice for running mate. I'm not opposed to him. I think it's fine. I'm open to it. But if that's the kind of thing we're going to hear from J.D. Vance, I'm all in. I'm shoving my chips all the way into the middle of the table. Was Marianne Williams trying to promote J.D. Vance by pointing out that quote? That's phenomenal. Let's wrap this up with J.D. Vance himself. I think that these 2 minutes are actually quite revealing and a great example of a summation of who J.D. Vance is and what his political philosophy is. Again, keep an open mind, make your determination for yourself. That's where I am right now. As Donald Trump has said, the running mate in the long run probably doesn't make that big of a difference, but it could. And if you want to know what makes J.D. Vance tick, and if you want to know who he is, here he is, kind of telling you in his own words.
I think that we should fight for the right of every American to live a good life in the country they call their own, to raise a family in dignity on a single middle-class job. It's a simple vision that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to live a good life in this country that is your own, that was built by your grandparents and parents, that will be inherited by your children. Now, it's, of course, more complicated in some ways than it sounds. I think that requires that we respect our history in order to give that to people, so that people are anchored in the traditions of this country, so that they can teach their children those traditions, and so they can pass off a feeling of rootedness in their own community. That's why, of course, we worry about the assault on our history in our schools. I think it requires that we give our children and ourselves the right to speak openly and participate meaningfully in this democratic society of ours. That's why we worry so much about censorship, whether it comes from the government or whether it comes from the big corporations. I think that it requires that we live and have work that has dignity and is meaningful. That's why we worry about our trade and economic policies, so that the people who do work hard and play by the rules actually have good jobs there to employ them. It's why we worry about our foreign policy, so that we don't send people to wars that have no connection to our national interest and end up depleting our country of its most useful resource, the young men and women who fight for our military. All of these things, all of the battles that we fight, as complicated as they are, affect and implicate this question of whether we're enabling the people, the citizens of this country, to live a good life in their own nation.
Pretty strong and compelling stuff, thoughtful stuff, wise stuff. And I, for one, am looking forward to the debate between that man and that message and Kamala Harris. about what can be, unburdened by what has been. That's going to be beautiful. One other quick political observation on this. I'm not breaking any news here. This entire election, as of now, is going to boil down to 3 states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. J.D. Vance comes from southeastern Ohio, which shares a border, a mountain range, and a culture with western Pennsylvania. Hillbilly Elegy, his book, his tome, could very well be about western Pennsylvania as much as it is about southeastern Ohio. Just base hard-knuckle politics here, guys. The Trump campaign puts J.D. Vance on a bus, and he campaigns in western Pennsylvania, in the Detroit suburbs of Michigan, and in southern Wisconsin for the next 4 months between now and Election Day. And he says that the way he knows how, communicating like a real human being, because he's only been a politician for less than 2 years, like a real human being with those voters who are open and welcome to hearing this message. Voters who voted for Donald Trump once before. You just have him crisscross those 3 regions, and all you need to do is land one of them for Donald Trump to be back in the White House as the 47th president. That's what I think is going on here with the J.D. Vance pick, and a pretty wise calculation.